Hello and welcome back. In our first segment of this lesson on plate tectonics, we want to talk about Alfred Wegener. And Alfred Wegener was a scientist, but his area of expertise was actually in weather phenomenon. And for example, he noticed that clouds collided with each other, and he noticed that clouds separated from each other. And he got the idea that perhaps the continents could do it as well. And so here is some of the evidence that shows that the continents have moved in the past. Now, this idea of continental drift is not quite correct, but it's close to the idea of plate tectonics, which we're going to be talking about later. So one of the evidences for continental drift is it looks as though the continents fitted together in the past. So if you were to look at South America and look at Africa, you will notice that if you were to cut them out of a map with some scissors, you can put those two continents together, and they kind of look like they fit. They look even more like they fit if you also include the continental shelves, which is the part of the continent that's covered up by the water. So if you include that, the fit's even better between South America and Africa. Okay, the second one is paleoclimates. And so today we have done research in South America and South Africa and in India and in Australia, and we have found evidence of glaciers. Now, as far as Antarctica, well, duh, of course it's going to have glaciers. It's really cold down there. But India, so they found evidence that part of India was underneath glaciers, very, very thick glaciers. But today, India is in a tropical zone. It has jungles. So how in the world could India have had glaciers? Well, if you take that map there of the current map of the world, and again, you cut it out, and then you rearrange India and South America and Africa and Antarctica, and you put it all back together again, when they were all connected, then you can see that all of those areas were very close to each other, and if that landmass was at the South Pole, then it would be covered in ice. So that is evidence from paleoclimates. And then also notice that South America and Africa are stuck together just like they are in this picture here. Okay, the next line of evidence is going to be when they look at fossils and rocks on the North and South America, they will notice that, like for example, in Arizona, that there is evidence of tropical plants that are there. But today in Arizona, it's a very dry climate. And so that's because that when Arizona was connected to the other continents, it was actually at a different latitude on the Earth's surface. So in that very first picture, it shows you that at the equator, it rains a lot. And then when you get to about 30 degrees, either north of the equator or 30 degrees south of the equator, that's where you're going to have bands of deserts. Well, they have found on various continents places where it was tropical, but yet those continents today might be in a place where you find deserts. Or places, they've found places where it looks like a desert today in those rocks, but yet those rocks are now located on a continent that's in the tropics where it rains a lot. So again, by putting together these continents, we can see that those, when the continents were all stuck together, they might have been at different latitudes where you would have had deserts or excessive rainfall there. Okay, and then matching fossils. So in this picture here, you got kind of a reptile, that brown one that kind of looks like a alligator, and then you've got another one that kind of looks like a lizard, and then you've got that one in purple that's kind of a cross between a frog and a lizard, and then you've got that flower. Okay, now look at the distribution of those different kinds of fossils on the various continents. So do you notice that for the green lizard, that it is in South America and it's also in Africa? So you'll notice that those fossils are spread out over all of those continents. Well, the problem though is that they're the same species, and chances of having today, so let's say that those continents are all spread apart like they are today, the odds of having exactly the same species in South America and in Africa is very remote. They would be slightly different from each other, but yet in this case they're exactly the same species. Well, it's easy to see how they could be the same species because they walked all across those continents. Now, if, on the other hand, the continents were all separated, how could one of those species get from one of those continents over to the other continent? Well, they could have swum, but chances are that that's not going to work. So this is, again, another line of evidence that shows that at least at one time in the past, all of these continents were put together. And then our last example here is of matching geological strata. So that, for example, if you look at the rock strata that's in the Appalachian Mountains of North America, you'll notice that those rock layers match with the rock layers over in the Atlas Mountains of Western Africa. And so this is evidence that at one time North America and Africa were connected together, so those same layers of rock were laid down, and then the two continents broke apart. And so there's also evidence of the same rock layers being in North America as in England, for example. So that's evidence that at one time Europe was also connected to North America. So the point is that all of this is evidence that at one time the continents were connected together and then subsequently they moved apart. Well, remember that this theory is continental drift, and this particular theory was not appreciated by the people of Alfred Wegener's day. They did not believe in this idea of continental drift because they saw that the continents were made of solid rock, and then what kind of a force would it take to be able to push an entire continent along like that? And so it wasn't until after Alfred Wegener died that they discovered his notes and then said, hey, maybe this guy knew what he was talking about in the first place. So this idea of continental drift is going to be incorporated into the theory of plate tectonics, which we're going to see. Okay, let's take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about mapping the ocean floor.